Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Tanya Vinton with Dallas Obesity Society. We have a really special discussion today with Selam Tadesse. She is the dietitian at Weight Wellness at UT Southwestern at Texas Health Dallas. And as part of the Weight Wellness team, she provides medical nutrition therapy and nutrition counseling to our weight management patients, facilitating lifestyle changes that reinforce long-term metabolic and weight health. So she received her Bachelor's of Science in Dietetics and Institutional Administration from Texas Women's University and has a Master's in Public Health in Social and Behavioral Sciences from the University of North Texas Health Science Center. She also completed her dietetic training through the Sodexo dietetic internships and a concentration in leadership, and has completed additional training in obesity and pediatrics and adults through the Commission of Dietetics registration. So Selam was born and raised in Ethiopia. She came to the US as an international student. Her journey into nutrition stemmed from her appreciation of whole foods, of her upbringing, and the experience of learning how to navigate grocery shopping and healthy cooking as a college student. She now calls Wiley, Texas home with her husband and her two children. Her interests include whole food, plant-based nutrition, and facilitating long-term behavior change. She believes that our diet and lifestyle habits are powerful drivers in preventing and reversing chronic health conditions. She strives to provide compassionate and individualized care and enjoys collaborating with her patients to foster and develop sustainable, healthy habits. And I'll also put in a disclaimer. I am totally fond of Selam because she works with my patients at Weight Wellness at UT Southwestern. So I know personally how great she is and what a great resource she is. So thank you, Selam, for taking time today to speak with our Dallas Obesity Society members.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vinton. I'm so excited to be here today.
Well, to dive right in, we're talking about the anti-inflammatory diet, which has really gotten a lot of press and a lot of excitement out there from patients and even clinicians alike. So let's start with that. What exactly is the anti-inflammatory diet?
So there's no one anti-inflammatory diet. There's actually not a universally accepted definition, but there are many versions. But the scientific evidence is showing that emphasizing eating whole, unrefined, minimally processed foods, or as we call them, like close to nature foods that are dense in nutrients, are what help either suppress inflammation. So today we're kind of looking at the role that our diet plays and our eating patterns play in chronic inflammation. And that's not always very easy to know that you have it, right? They don't have noticeable symptoms, and over time it can pave the way for a lot of chronic health conditions that we're facing. So like CVD, diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, Alzheimer's, and cancers as well. So the main thing though is to use food as medicine, but the main food groups that are encouraged are an increased intake of fruits and vegetables. So all colors of the rainbow to provide like high levels of antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds. We have our whole grains that are rich in fiber. And there's more of a movement towards incorporating more plant-based protein. So from legumes like beans and lentils, soy foods like edamame, tofu, tempeh, like nuts and seeds as well. So a lot of emphasis on heart-healthy fats, monounsaturated fats that we can get from olive oil or avocados, and then polyunsaturated fats. These are fats that specifically omega-3 rich foods that you can find in fish, oily fish like mackerel, salmon, herring, sardines, and plant-based sources of those would be coming from your walnuts, your flax seeds, your chia, and your hemp. And it also encourages generously flavoring foods with these antioxidant spices and herbs. So green herbs, turmeric, we're talking about ginger, garlic, a lot of flavors going on. And the other thing that's very common as well is frequent consumption of tea and of course water. And if alcohol is consumed, we want a moderate consumption of that red wine. So it doesn't mean you need to start drinking, but if you do, red wine seems to be more beneficial, and maybe like small amounts of antioxidant rich, like dark chocolate, at least maybe 70% cacao. Did you say something? I'm sorry.
No, that was just a buzz.
Okay. And yeah, so it's very diverse, very full of whole foods. And when it comes to foods to limit or pro-inflammatory foods, we're talking about foods that are high in saturated fat. So full fat dairy, cream, butter, fatty cuts of meats and poultry. We're completely avoiding trans fats, right? So fats from partially hydrogenated oils that are found in like heavily processed foods, ultra processed foods like margarine, commercial like baked goods, frozen pizza, microwave popcorn, that kind of thing, non-dairy creamer. And then we also want to reduce excessive amounts of sugar through like sugar sweetened beverages, refined carbohydrates. So we're talking about, white bread, pasta, rice, avoiding highly processed, high fat meats as well. So cured meats like bacon, sausage, hot dogs, bologna, cold cuts. So most of the stuff, and then of course, excessive amounts of alcohol that also drives inflammation. There's the foods on the like avoid list aren't anything new that we haven't heard before. I'm sure like there's been millions of like headlines featuring every single one of these, but I don't think people realize how much processed foods we're consuming in the standard American diet. And that's, I think, where the issue lies. So just, I'm trying to remember the source, but it was like I believe USDA Economic Research Service. They had a pie chart showing just the standard American diet and how much food we're consuming from like the different food groups. And they were saying that 63% of the standard American diet comes from heavily processed foods. Then we have like a quarter of the pie chart showing, animal foods at 25%, which further contribute to like saturated fat intake, and just 12% from plant foods. So that's, your veggies, your fruit, your whole grains and legumes, 12% are coming from that. But if we actually look closely at that, only half of that is actual whole foods. The rest is processed plant food. So like, think of like spinach in a souffle or apples in like apple pie. So not even really, a measly 6% is coming from whole foods. And I'm not trying to vilify processed foods. We definitely need to think about processed foods on a continuum. There are like minimally processed foods that give us a lot of benefits and advantages. So, there's convenience. It keeps things shelf stable. It keeps things affordable. Like, maybe frozen fruits that are processed at the peak of harvest, canned beans and tomatoes. All of those are nutrient dense processed foods, and they're amazing. But we are having a lot more of the heavily processed foods like chips, crackers, deli meat, on a daily basis, ultra processed food from like soft drinks, frozen pizza, baked goods. And those foods don't provide any nutritional value. And they're adding saturated fat, they're adding refined oils, they're adding sugar. And that's the foundation of our diet. Not only are they very calorically dense, they're very easy to overconsume. So because they're basically designed to be very highly palatable and convenient. So it's not a surprise that 70% of the population, are struggling with being overweight or having obesity. So we need to find a way to make like the healthier choice, the easier choice. So that's what we'll be talking about today a little bit. That would be my, description of the anti-inflammatory diet. There's a lot of different ones out there. Some are very fad-like, but the more evidence-based ones would be the ones that we can look into in just a moment.
So I guess, given the whole interest in anti-inflammatory diet, what kind of specific evidence do we have as this, treatment in obesity and weight loss? What does inflammation do to our bodies, and how does a pro-inflammatory diet affect us in a health manner?
So, the more studied or evidence-based approaches are going to be things, the diets like your Mediterranean diet, the dietary approaches to hypertension, for example, those have been studied extensively. When you just Google anti-inflammatory, a lot of like cookbooks come up, a lot of diet plans, detoxes. It's very confusing for the person to just like figure out what's going on. And some of them will even categorically like eliminate grains. They will eliminate soy. They'll just cut out dairy, like arthritis, especially in the arthritis world. There's a whole elimination of vegetables that are called nightshades, right? So those are your tomatoes, bell peppers, potatoes, eggplants. These foods are just being cut out, but we don't have that research to show, if they're causing or contributing to inflammation. And in fact, in most of these foods, they're very beneficial. They can be very anti-inflammatory, like soy, that's minimally processed, tofu, tempeh, edamame. So just to jump and eliminate grains for some reason, or gluten, that's like a new villain, right? If you don't have a wheat allergy or a celiac disease, which just affects 1% of the population, we're getting rid of excellent sources of fiber. So there, yes, it's not a one size fits all approach. If the person has tracked their symptoms and they do experience, joint pain or fatigue or GI symptoms, we need to look at what's, driving the inflammation in the diet and other lifestyle factors as well. So when it comes to evidence-based approaches, the Mediterranean diet really emphasizes all these anti-inflammatory foods that we talked about, these eating patterns. And it has been linked to weight management. Since they do focus on more plant-based whole foods, they're not just removing excess sugar, sodium, and like the harmful fats, but they're emphasizing those whole foods more at each meal. So of all the dietary patterns, the Mediterranean has been shown to have the highest anti-inflammatory potential. And there was actually a recently published umbrella review of, I believe it was in Advances in Nutrition, and they did a meta-analysis of these randomized controlled trials and the impact they had on weight, BMI, cardiometabolic risk factors. They looked at like low carb, high protein, DASH, Mediterranean, and DASH and Mediterranean seem to be one of the more effective ones, and they're very reasonable approaches that are backed by science. So that would be where I would start if someone were to ask me about an anti-inflammatory diet, that type of eating pattern.
So to kind of round out our discussion today, if a patient comes to you saying, hey, doc, hey, dietitian, I read on the internet about something with the anti-inflammatory diet. I know not much about it, but I do hear that it can help with reducing joint pains, reducing inflammation, which can cause heart disease, stroke disease. How can I start to implement that kind of diet?
So yeah, definitely. If they are already working on reducing, ultra processed foods from their diet, we want to shift the focus to, what are we adding, right? We want to focus on adding nutrient density to the diet. That's really what it comes down to. And I think that simple perspective change can help them find ways to make small and impactful changes in their daily food intake. So if at each meal we're asking the question, how am I nourishing my body? What nutrient dense foods am I choosing, right? We're looking for opportunities to add more whole foods. That can be dependent on the person. It might be swapping out potato chips, for example, with portion controlled nuts, like an ounce of nuts, or even using, for the person that cooks, using fresh herbs and spices in your homemade like salad dressing. It can be, instead of getting like the store bought, right? At lunch and dinner, making it a point to fill half your plate with vegetables, planning like meals around salads more, choosing fruit for dessert. So things like that are very small, but can be, daily habits that they add incrementally, and really reframing the way we think about, how we use plant foods and whole foods, where we just see them as sides, but they can actually be more of the center of the plate. So there's no one superfood, like there's no cure all, like there's no one food that's going to counter everything, all the negative effects of the standard American diet, but the cumulative effects are what are important. So if someone's getting really stuck on eliminating foods instead of diversifying their diet, I think it's important that, we check what their approach is, if they're being overly restrictive, why, what is your rationale or reasoning for that? Help direct them to a more reasonable approach, like what we talked about, the Mediterranean, and, have them work with maybe a dietitian, but monitoring their caloric intake as well. So it's not a free for all. We're not pouring olive oil on everything, right? But really being mindful about portion sizes. But I would say if there is like a food sensitivity or on board, or there is like an autoimmune disorder, and they've eliminated all the processed foods from their diet and are really focused on whole foods, but they're still having symptoms, I would refer them to a dietitian that's well versed with that kind of elimination diet like protocol. A lot of people eliminate foods and then they get stuck in that elimination and they don't reintroduce foods to figure out what their threshold levels are. So the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a directory of qualified dietitians. It allows you to go in there, like search by zip code and filter for dietitians in your area that might specialize in things like food allergies or intolerances. And then there's also great resources if we're talking about like whole food based eating, like organizations like Old Ways. It's a nonprofit that focuses on more traditional and whole foods. And they have tons of resources for providers on the Mediterranean diet, like real pictures of plates. They have different food pyramids that are culturally relevant. So like the African American heritage food pyramid, or the Latin American heritage food pyramid, or the Asian heritage food pyramid. So they provide a lot of free, low cost materials for healthcare providers and resources for patients, as well as continuing education. So that's a really good resource, is Old Ways, just to get started on that.
Thank you so much. That sounds like an awesome place to start. Really appreciate you bringing that to light for us. So we're going to go ahead and end our discussion there today. That was all really, really helpful information. I hope those of you who joined us found that to be helpful. And again, there's no one size fit all diet. We're all working towards improving nutrition every day, all of us. And it's not about perfection. It's really about just improvement and progress. So with that, everyone have a great 4th of July weekend. We appreciate you joining in today.